Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka is 20th century fictional work, though it is a fiction, but it reveals the reality of the real world. The story explores the journey of Groga Samsa, who is one day transformed into a vermin, and after that it explores how his family treats him when he is no more him, and how only your physical body is everything in this world. So let's start this heart-touching novel. One morning, when Groga Samsa woke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. He lay on his armor-like back, and if he lifted his head a little, he could see his brown belly slightly domed and divided by arcs into stiff sections. The bedding was hardly able to cover it and seemed ready to slide off any moment. His many legs, pitifully thin compared with the size of the rest of him, waved about helplessly as he looked. "What's happened to me?" he thought. It wasn't a dream. His room, a proper human room, although a little too small, lay peacefully between its four familiar walls. A collection of textile samples lay spread out on the table. Samsa was a traveling salesman, and above it there hung a picture that he had recently cut out of an illustrated magazine and housed in a nice gilded frame. It showed a lady fitted out with a fur hat and fur bow who sat upright, raising a heavy fur muff that covered the whole of her lower arm towards the viewer. Groga then turned to look out the window at the dull weather. Drops of rain could be heard hitting the pane, which made him feel quite sad. How about if I sleep a little bit longer and forget all this nonsense, he thought. But that was something he was unable to do because he was used to sleeping on his right, and in his present state couldn't get into that position. However hard he threw himself into his right, he couldn't roll back to where he was. He must have tried it 100 times, shut his eyes so that he wouldn't have to look at the floundering legs, and only stopped when he began to feel a mild, dull pain there that he had never felt before. "Oh God," he thought, "what a strenuous career it is that I have chosen, traveling day in and day out, doing business like this takes much more effort than doing your own business at home. And on top of that, there's the curse of traveling, worries about making train connections, bad and irregular food, contract with different people all the time so that you can never get to know anyone or become friends with them. It can all go to hell." He felt a slight itch up on his belly, pushed himself slowly up on his back towards the headboard so that he could lift his head better, found where the itch was, and saw that it was covered with lots of little white spots which he didn't know what to make of. And when he tried to feel the place with one of his legs, he drew it quickly back because as soon as he touched it, he was overcome by a cold shudder. He slid back into his firmer position. Getting up early all the time, he thought, it makes you stupid. You've got to get enough sleep. Other traveling salesmen live a life of luxury. For instance, whenever I go back to the guest house during the morning to copy the contract, these gentlemen are always still sitting there eating their breakfast. I ought to just try that with my boss. I'd get kicked out on the spot. But who knows, maybe that would be the best thing for me. If I didn't have my parents to think about, I would have given in my notice a long time ago. I'd have gone to my boss and told him just what I think, tell him everything I would, let him know just what I feel. He would fall right off his desk, and it's a funny sort of business to be sitting up there at your desk, talking down at your subordinates from up there, especially when you have to go right up close because the boss is hard of hearing. Well, there's still some hope. Once I have got the money together to pay off my parents' debt to him, another 5 or 6 years, I suppose, that's definitely what I'll do. And that's when I'll make a big change. I have got to get up. My train leaves at 5. And he looked over at the alarm clock ticking on the chest of drawers. God in heaven, he thought. It was 6:30 and the hands were quietly moving forwards. It was even later than 7:30, more like 7:15. Had the alarm clock not rung, he could see from the bed that it had been set for 4 o'clock as it should have been. It certainly must have rung, yes, but was it possible to quietly sleep through that furniture rattling noise? True, he had not slept peacefully, but probably all the more deeply because of that. What should he do now? The next train went at 7. If he were to catch that, he would have to rush like mad, and the collection of samples was still not back. And he did not feel at all particularly fresh and lively. And even if he did catch the train, he would not avoid his boss's anger, as the office assistant would have been there to see the 5 o'clock train go. He would have put in the report about Groger's not being there for a very long time. The office assistant was the boss's man, spineless and with no understanding. What about if he reported sick? But that would be extremely strange and suspicious, as in 15 years of service, Groger had never once been ill. His boss would certainly come round with the doctor from the medical insurance company, accuse his parents of having a lazy son, and accept the doctor's recommendation not to make any claim, as the doctor believed that no one was ever ill, but that many were walk shy. And what's more, would he have been entirely wrong in this case? Groger did, in fact, apart from excessive sleepiness after sleeping for so long, feel completely well and even felt much hungrier than usual. And he was still hurriedly thinking all this through, unable to decide to get out of the bed when the clock struck 7:15. There was a cautious knock at the door near his head. "Groger," somebody called. It was his mother. "It's 7:15. Didn't you want to go somewhere?" This gentle voice, Groger was shocked when he heard his own voice answering. It could hardly be recognized as the voice he had before. As if from deep inside him there was a painful and uncontrollable squeaking mixed with it. The words could be made out at first, but then there was a sort of echo which made him unclear, leaving the hearer unsure whether he had heard properly or not. Groger had wanted to give a full answer and explain everything, but in these circumstances contented him to do just that. "Yes, mother. Yes, thank you. I'm getting up now." The change in Groger's voice probably could not be noticed outside the wooden door, as his mother was satisfied with his explanation and shuffled away. But the short conversation made the other members of the family aware that Groger, against their expectations, was still at home, and soon his father came knocking at one of the side doors, gently but with his face. "Groger? Groger," he called. "What's wrong?" And after a short while he called again with a warming deepness in his voice, "Groger, Groger." At the other side of the door his sister came plaintively. "Groger, aren't you well? Do you need anything?" Groger answered to both sides. "I'm ready now," making an effort to remove all the strangeness from his voice by enunciating very carefully and putting long pauses between each individual words. His father went back to his breakfast, but his sister whispered, "Groger, open the door. I beg of you." Groger, however, had no thought of opening the door, and instead congratulated himself for his cautious habit acquired from his travelling of locking all doors at night even when he was at home. The first thing he wanted to do was to get up in peace without being disturbed, to get dressed, and most of all to have his breakfast. Only then would he consider what to do next, as he was well aware that he would not bring these thoughts to any sensible conclusions by laying in bed. He remembered that he had often felt a slight pain in the bed, perhaps caused by laying awkwardly, but that had always turned out to be pure imagination, and he wondered how his imaginations would slowly resolve themselves today. He did not have the slightest doubt that the change in his voice was nothing more than the first sign of a serious cold, which was an occupational hazard from traveling salesmen. It was a simple matter to throw off the covers. He only had to blow himself up a little and they fell off by themselves. But it became difficult after that especially, and he was so exceptionally bored. He would have used his arms and his hands to push himself up, but instead of them he only had all those little legs continuously moving in different directions, and which he was moreover unable to control. If he wanted to bend one of them, then that was the first one that would stretch itself out. And if he finally managed to do what he wanted with the leg, all the others seemed to be set free and would move about painfully. "This is something that can't be done in bed," Groger said to himself, "so don't keep trying to do it." The first thing he wanted to do was get the lower part of his body out of the bed, But he had never seen this lower part and could not imagine what it looked like. It turned out to be too hard to move. It went so slowly and finally, almost in a frenzy, when he carelessly shoved himself forwards with all the force that he could gather. He chose the wrong direction, hit hard against the lower bedpost, and learned from the burning pain he felt that the lower part of his body might well, at present, be the most sensitive.